Hello everyone, this is Tacticalish here, and today we are looking at a battle played recently on a tournament I hosted called Tzeentch RNG BS, where players have to be using as part of their army an army core designed by other players and randomly assigned to them. So as a result, we have a lot of non-meta army builds, and this is one of my favorite in terms of the thematical matchup, which I called the wood versus the bone. On the Wood Elf side, we have a wood army designed by World Beta, played by Rocket Rogue, with all sizes of wood here. Smaller wood like the Dryads, medium wood, Treekin, and the big woods. We have the Treeman and the daddy of all woods, Papa Durthu himself, standing tall and erect in the middle of the army, surrounded by Wood Elf companions, Eternal Gods with shields, Winterheart Guardians, and a couple Glade Gods to provide that fire support. There's also a bit of magic support from the Spellsinger, providing some healing, and the Glade Captain, providing some extra single entity fighting power, and also melee stat buffs in the form of Horn of Isha and Dance of Loek. As for the Tomb King's Bone Army, designed by Will Francesco and played by Curio, we have all sizes of bone as well in terms of skeleton spears, the smaller bone, the medium bone of Nekara Horseman, and standing in the middle, tall and proud, ready to blow his payload onto the enemy, the Bone Giant, with a bunch of devastating firepower. Accompanying him, there are two Necrosphinx required by the Army Corps, who are supported by a Necrotect on a chariot for that construct healing. This duo of construct is going to be tough for the Wood Elves to beat down. For the Tomb King's leadership, there is Arkan the Black ready to summon even more bony skeletons to the battlefield, and for the spell kit, he has brought the Spirit Leech as well as the aspect of the Dread Knight, providing his army with a bit more magic attacks to overcome that physical resistance on the Woody Tree army. Anyways, that's it for the army builds. Enough with the innuendos, now let's get straight into the wood versus bone action. With a Bone Giant in the Tomb King's army, the Wood Elf have no hope to challenge them in a ranged combat, so they will be forced to move forward with all the infantry and monster units while just praying the Bone Giant's arrow not to hit them as they march. While the Tomb Kings will be maneuvering most of their killing power to the right of their formation, hoping to draw away that Wood Elf attention onto one single flank as they attempt a flank overload, with all the Sphinx and Nekara Horsemen on one side, and some skeleton horses moving towards the left, trying to tear apart this kind of Wood Elf infantry formation and find the holes and gaps to charge into the Glade Gods. At the same time, the Bone Giant right here unloading all those white spiritual balls of energy, bombarding the Wood Elf formations. The magic attacks and armor piercing would be really useful against the tree units, who rely so much on their physical resistance and their heavy armor to mitigate any incoming ranged firepower. You can see the Bone Giant shots have already put a dent in Durthu's HP, while the rest of the Tomb King's army continue their maneuver around the Wood Elf formations, while the Wood Elves held tight, using those Glade God firepower to counteract any approach from the skeleton horses. A premature Earth Flood is dropped, hoping to mitigate some of that range firepower damage from the Bone Giant, but that's not going to be quite enough, and a lot of that Winds of Magic is wasted as the other units are all perfectly healthy, not exactly getting any benefit from the healing. Anyways, the frontline engagement is soon to begin as the Nekara Horsemen just kind of dance around trying to bait the Wood Elf units out of position, just like here the Dryads pushing out way ahead of their peers and now kind of isolated from the rest of the army. And on the right flank here, there are some Eternal Gods and Treekin pushing way ahead of their remaining army, trying to go for a flanking maneuver with the slow and sluggish trees, hoping to tie down the Bone Giant in melee combat, which is not exactly a bad attempt, honestly, but the skeleton spears would be holding them back for a decent amount of time. While in the front line, the engagement has truly begun as Durthu took another hit from the Bone Giant down to half health, and the double Sphinx are trying to work down this poor Firebark Elder, but the Firebark Elder with that 70% flame resistance and another 20% of physical resistance, a lot of that damage from both Necrosphinx would be mitigated, especially with the Sphinx of Uzkav's fire attacks. The Wildfire Aura on the Firebark Elders would be providing that extra fire resistance to surrounding units, eliminating the tree units' weaknesses to flaming attacks. On top of that, the Wood Elf's Eternal Gods, who doesn't have a fire weakness to begin with, now enjoys the extra fire resistance as well. So the Regiment of Renowned Necrosphinx really should get out of there and stay away from the Firebark Elders. Though in the front line, the Treeman has proven to be a less effective anti-large combatant, losing in the duel against the Necrosphinx regardless of the healing, though the Liber Mortis on the Necrosphinx is a bit wasted, seeing the Treeman actually does magic attack, negating all those extra physical resistance from the spell. Though now a nice spell of Aspect of the Dread Knight is dropped into the blob, buffing up surrounding units with a bunch of magical attacks. That allows them to bypass that physical resistance on all these 3 units, getting some nice damage boost without directly altering their melee stats. Even some of the skeletons got it, even if they won't need it against the Eternal Gods. And that one unit that massively benefits from the spell, the Necrosphinx, with the magic attack, high armor piercing, high anti-large, beating down Durthu with a combination of Spirit Leech, the 2 woody giants are losing against the terrifying bone constructs of Tomb Kings. So the Daddy of all woods will be forced out of engagement, being routed from combat, leaving these Eternal Gods alone in this kind of pitch engagement against the monsters and the skeletons. But fear not, they do have some pretty decent melee stats. They will be holding firm against the poor skeleton chaff, as the Dryads will continue their beatdown on the lightly armored skeleton spears. Actually, they are distracted by the Ushapti summon right now, as well as the Necrosphinx, wasting their damage on some heavy armor. Though a really nice attempt of shutting down the ranged units right here, the Nekara Horseman charges into the Glade Gods and quickly pulled out before the Dryads tie them down, and a second unit, a healthier unit of Nekara Horsemen, charges straight in, rout off the Glade Gods with a single charge, then quickly pull out of combat before they get bogged down. And now going after these regrouped units of Glade Gods, as the Necrosphinx and the Necrotect are chasing down the 2 routing Treemen. With one final hit from the Sphinx, the hardwood giant Durthu has fallen over limp on the ground, as his murderer, the Necrosphinx, parades over his dead body. That leaves the Wood Elf army without a leader, while the Necrosphinx continues to chase down some poor archers at the back. So all that's left for the Tree Huggers are their Treekin, who can tank the damage, and their damage dealers, the Eternal Gods and Dryads. That gives the Wood Elves a little bit of back foot in this kind of melee engagement here, as the only remaining big monsters are the Sphinx of Uskav, who got another Liber Mortis to mitigate that damage from all these Eternal Gods. Pretty nice casting right there. And then we have the Nekara Horsemen buffed up by Aspect of Dread Knight here, doing more effective damage to these Wraiths of the Frozen Hearted. And then there's the Skeleton Warriors and whatnot, tying down a bunch of Eternal Gods, whittling down their health and vigor as combat progresses. Though good news for the Wood Elves is that the Bone Giant is now tied down by a bunch of Eternal Gods, and Treekin taking massive damage from those anti-large armor piercing attacks, and unable to escape from the heavy mass of the Treekin. This is a massive oversight on the Tomb King's player, as the Bone Giant's magical armor-piercing ammo would be crucial in taking down Treekins in late game. Now, even more good news for the Wood Elves, their front line has been secured from the Tomb Kings, as most of the Skeleton Warriors and horses are beaten back or on the verge of crumbling. All the Tomb King units are basically retreating from this blob of Wood Elf units who are determined to avenge their fallen Tree Daddy. Just like this Glade Captain here, who is no longer in melee, free to shoot up Arcanda Black from afar, whose HP is at critical level right now. If he stays around for too long, he will get finished off by those missiles from the Glade Captain, so he is quickly pulling out of combat, trying to use his mounted speed advantage to get out of the firing range of the Glade Captain. Now with the Wood Elf army trying to reposition and the Tomb King's army chasing after routing Wood Elf units, let us go into fast forward. After casting one last Earthblood, the Life Spell Singer is caught up by the Necrosphinx and eliminated. And the Treekin is now pinned in by the Sphinx of Uskav and some Nekara Horsemen, though the Bone Giant is left alone against all these Eternal Gods' pursuit. With the relentless pursuit, finally the Bone Giant is caught in combat, with down to around 1000 HP surrounded by anti-large armor piercing. The Bone Giant has reached negative leadership and is slowly crumbling into dust. Even with the Sphinx of Uskav and Necrosphinx charging in, it is too little too late. The construct simply took way too much damage in combat, his leadership no longer holds, the unit disintegrates, a burst of white energy explodes from his head, and the Bone Giant is no more. Now let us go into fast forward again, as the Eternal Gods are being finished off by the Necrosphinxes in vengeance. Now the Tomb Kings are doing a bit of psycho charging, pulling out the Necrosphinxes and charge in the Nekara Horsemen at some isolated Eternal Gods. Slowly wear down the lightly armored Wood Elf infantry with the charge impact damage. While the Necrotect as well right now charging in after the Nekara Horsemen pulled out, Same goes for the Necro Sphinx here. The Double Sphinx beating down all these bunch of Wood Elf infantry, doing some pretty nice damage. But overall, there's still a tough nut to crack, and that is the Firebark Elder. That 70% fire resistance would be lethal against the Sphinx of Uzcav, as the Sphinx would not be able to do much damage against this entire unit of smoking pieces of hot wood. And with the surrounding supporting Eternal Guards doing those armor-piercing anti-large damage, the Sphinxes are slowly worn down by the persistent effort of all these Wood Elf infantry, so it really comes down to whether the Sphinxes can be assigned to the correct targets. But this is not exactly what's happening right now, as the Sphinx of Uzcav, the flaming attacks being directed onto the Firebark Elders. This is exactly what the Wood Elves wanted. And then the Necro Sphinx, the regular one, is stuck fighting a bunch of armor-piercing troops. Despite the help of the Necrotech, it will be proven too much for this Necro Sphinx to handle. Down to around 1000 HP, still dropping, especially with the leadership into negatives right now. It is crumbling into dust. Though I do have to say the Tomb King's player have some top-notch micro, with the Nehekara Horsemen cycle charging again and again, successfully breaking off most of these remaining Wood Elf infantry, but the unbreakable Winterheart Gods hold firm. While the Sphinx of Uzcav is still busy dealing with these bunch of Firebark Elders, as his Necro Sphinx companion fell to the valiant effort of these elite Eternal Gods. This is a heavy blow to the Tomb King's army, as they no longer have the means to finish off the Firebark Elders. While the Necrotech here is cycle charging in and out of the Wood Elf infantry, but unable to shatter them once and for all, and the Winterheart Gods are still holding on. They do have that unbreakable trait after all, so 11 unit models fighting to the absolute bitter end. Their gallant efforts will be inspiring their Wood Elf brethren for one last charge against the towering monstrosity that is the Sphinx of Uzcav. Nehekara Horseman charges in, cycle charging, really nice micro right there from the Tomb King's player, but every time they charges in, they suffer a few counter attacks and will be losing unit models and HP as time goes by. They will not be holding for too long, as their HP slowly runs out from combat attrition. And with that, balance of power is slowly moving into the favor of the Wood Elf army here, as the Firebark Elders really MVP tanking for ages against the Sphinx of Uzcav, buying time for these Treekin to get back into combat. They were actually routed to the other side of the battlefield. Now, marching all the way back into combat, they will be surrounding the Sphinx of Uzcav, pinning him down and punching him from the flanks and rear. While the Necrotech will be cycle charging in and out continuously, and the Nehekara Horsemen going for that one last charge down to 5 unit models, disintegrating rapidly into dust. Without cavalry support, the single entities here have to go mano a mano against all these spears and Treekin, who have plenty anti-large and armor-piercing to punch through their thick hide. And so with the Firebark Elders using their superior melee defense and flame resistance to hold out against the Sphinx of Uzcav, the couple handful of remaining Winterheart Gods were able to drag down the mighty Sphinx. That leaves only the Necrotech on the field for the Tomb Kings, and no longer able to cycle charge, the Necrotech alone cannot carry this battle. After a long and hard battle of almost 15 minutes, the power of the wood has prevailed. Massive shout out to Rocket Road and Curio for playing in this incredible battle, and of course, big thanks to World Beater and also Will Francesco for designing the builds. The tournament matchups are all done by RNG, so it has to be Tzeentch hands that pitted these two builds together, giving us this destined battle of hardwood against big bone. Normally in this matchup, you wouldn't see any of the armies spraying the large big monsters like Treeman or Necrosphinx, since both armies have some powerful armor-piercing missiles that can snipe out these large scary single entities. But in this tournament, both players are forced to bring these big giant single entities, so as a result, we have some glorious monster mashing action. And of course, in the end, the Wood Elf monsters have claimed superiority. For the army performances, Durfu and the Treeman actually didn't do too much damage, as they were pitted against the Necrosphinx dedicated anti-large unit, and they were very disadvantaged in this engagement. Their heavy armor is negated by the armor piercing on the Necrosphinxes, while their physical resistance are cut through by the aspect of the Dread Knight's magic attacks. That leaves the burden to carry the Wood Elf army onto the back of these Firebark Elders to tank all the damage, but they are not exactly great damage dealers. The burden of DPS has fallen onto these humble Eternal Gods, most of them getting some amazing value. The Winterheart Gods getting over 1.6k worth of damage value, and the other two getting around 1.5k and 1.4k worth of damage value. The Eternal Gods might not be the most expensive infantry, but their effectiveness against large armored monsters cannot be overstated. For the rest of the army, we have the Glade Gods being shut down by very effective use of Nekara Horsemen, and then the Glade Captain managed to snipe out Arkan the Black, while the Spellsinger of Life, of course, she is there for supporting duty only, getting some nice Earthbloods, and that's basically it. As for the Treekin unit, their role were mostly tanking damage from enemy units, so without the Firebark Elders, these Treekin got hit pretty hard by the Sphinx of Uzkev. As for Kurio's Tomb King's army, a really great fight with the Nekara Horsemen, just that in the end, the Sphinx of Uzkev fighting the wrong target, being stuck on the Firebark Elders really cost him the game. Also a massive mistake in the Bone Giant as well, leaving it alone against a bunch of Eternal Gods and Treekin. All the ammo could have been used on sniping out the Firebark Elders, but alas, the Bone Giant was slain early. As for the Necrosphinxes, of course, they are some really powerful single entity units, so as expected, did a lot of damage against the Treekin Treemen, basically earning back their own worth, while the Necrotech some really nice cycle charging, running in and out of the Wood Elf formations, also healing up some of the constructs of the Tomb King's army. And as for the Nekara Horsemen, got some really nice pressure onto the enemy Glade Gods, but unfortunately, all these infantry are not exactly the best target for them to fight. Dryads have okay armor to mitigate their charge, while Eternal Gods can punch back effectively with their anti-large, inflicting massive casualties on all these cavalry units when they charge into melee combat. While Arkan the Black, not exactly a melee combatant, but was forced to stay in melee to recharge his skeleton ability, took a lot of damage from combat attrition, and in the end got sniped out by the Glade Captain's sharpshooting. And that's basically it for today's battle. I hope viewers you enjoyed this battle, and if you do, remember to hit the like and subscribe to see more videos on Total Warhammer multiplayer, including more battle replays like this one, wild army builds, tips and strategies for Total Warhammer multiplayer, and also occasional memes and shit posts. And if you have any battles you want to share, feel free to drop by my Discord or send me an email with the replay file attached. I'll be sure to check them out. Once again, massive thanks to all the players who have participated in my tournament. And that is gonna be all for today. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next one. Tactical Lich, signing out.